I think we're going to get started if that's all right. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. Good morning, I should say. My name is Sadie Waddington, and I am the Communications and Outreach Director here at Coastal Quest. I'll be one of the facilitators for today's webinar, along with my Coastal Quest colleagues, Kristen Dawn, one of our directors based in Oregon, and Lilia Lampkin, who is a program coordinator located here in Oakland, California with me. Lilia will be providing chat and technical support, so if you have any issues, please reach out. I'd like to welcome all of you this morning to our webinar series on accelerating coastal nature-based solutions. This webinar is part of a two-part series where practitioners can explore and learn from case studies that showcase natural solutions for building coastal resilience that are community-led and provide multiple benefits. These solutions in turn help to further the goals of 30 by 30 and the Biden-Harris administration's America the Beautiful initiatives. We're going to pop in the chat our follow-up registration. We have a second part to this series on March 14th, another webinar, and we'd love for you to join us. So we'll pop a link in the chat for you to register there. So a little bit of housekeeping before we begin. A couple announcements to make. First, this webinar is being recorded. Coastal Quest may use the video footage recording during the webinar for educational and promotional purposes. The recording of the webinar will be available for viewing on the Coastal Quest website. We'll also probably send it out to you by email for all registrants. And then second, closed captioning of this webinar is available in multiple languages. So to access the closed captioning, click the closed caption and translate button at the bottom of your Zoom application and select your language of choice. If we do have our chat open, however, we encourage you to, during our question and answer period with our speakers, to use the Q&A feature, which is also at the bottom of the Zoom application. This will allow speakers the option to answer your questions online and keep us organized as we move through the questions. We'll try to answer as many questions as we can. So objectives for our webinar today. The objectives for today's webinar is to learn about different approaches to nature-based solutions and multi-benefit projects. You'll be hearing tips, best practices, funding strategies, and hear about important resources as well. We'll be looking at 4 different case studies. We have an amazing lineup of speakers. These speakers will be sharing case studies focusing on novel approaches to attaining coastal land for conservation, restoration, and climate risk reduction. We hope this information is helpful to you and can be used to get your projects on the ground and in your communities as well. To give you a little overview of the agenda and what to expect today, we'll be including a brief introduction to Coastal Quest and our work to accelerate nature-based solutions. This will be followed by our first 2 speakers and really just a short Q&A. And then we'll go into our second 2 speakers. They'll present their case studies, followed by a much longer Q&A where you can ask questions of all 4 speakers if you'd like. We'll also be taking a quick poll at that time as well. And then we'll take a look at our coastal funding database before we conclude the webinar. All right, so let's get started. Coastal Quest. So Kristen and I, my fellow facilitator, want to take a few minutes to tell you about Coastal Quest and our work to accelerate nature-based solutions. Coastal Quest is a service-focused nonprofit based in Oakland, California, and working across the U.S. and internationally. Our driving force is to work with partners and accelerate solutions to build resilient coastal communities for people, nature, and climate. And we can put a link in the chat, thanks Lilia, that shares our website. So some of our overarching goals for our organization, two key ones here: building multi-benefit solutions for healthy and resilient coasts. This focuses on protecting and enhancing nearshore marine, coastal intertidal wetlands, and watershed habitat. This includes species in these zones, as well as areas of blue carbon sequestration or significance. Our second overarching goal is to increase coastal resilience for vulnerable communities and economies. This focuses on, the focus of this work is with vulnerable and priority coastal communities, where we're building multi-benefit solutions from the bottom up. This work addresses capacity of the community, bringing into play public-private partnerships to bridge gaps, and developing effective governance that breaks through funding inequities. All of these programs and efforts support both, all our programs and efforts support both goals. So please feel free to reach out if you would like to learn more about our work and how we can support your projects. And now I'd like to turn the webinar over to my colleague, Kristen Dawn, who will provide a short background on our nature-based solutions work before introducing our first speaker.
Hello, everyone. I'm Kristen Dawn, a director here at Coastal Quest and a project lead for our nature-based solutions for resilient coasts and communities work. So thank you, Sadie, for sharing an overview of today's agenda and an overview of Coastal Quest. And I just wanted to take a few minutes to go just a little bit deeper and share with you Coastal Quest's approach to achieving our goals and accelerating nature-based solutions. So our work is really aimed at accelerating the development and implementation of natural solutions for building coastal resilience. So we're helping build a pipeline of community-driven projects by supporting community groups, nonprofit organizations, and governments in developing and implementing multi-benefit nature-based solution projects that conserve, restore, and connect coastal lands and waters, projects that build coastal resilience in vulnerable coastal communities, particularly projects in and with communities that are less resourced or underserved, BIPOC communities, and communities in need of environmental and climate justice. Also projects rooted in equity, and projects that really further the goals of the 30 by 30 global movement and the principles of the Biden-Harris administration's America the Beautiful initiative, whose goals are to conserve, restore, and connect 30% of lands and waters by the year 2030. So, what do we mean by multi-benefit coastal nature-based solutions? We mean projects that use natural solutions to build resilience for both people and nature, and that provide more than one benefit. So a project that maybe reduces climate risk, but also protects biodiversity, or a project that provides clean water, but also increases access to nature, or one that improves public health by also protecting cultural resources. So Coastal Quest's work and our approach is based on a needs assessment we conducted in 2022, where we surveyed 179 coastal practitioners, and we conducted in-depth interviews with an additional 21 leaders and groups to better understand what communities and governments need to support the development and implementation of multi-benefit coastal nature-based solution projects. And what we heard from those from our survey and interviews was a clear demand for funding and financial technical assistance. So for example, assistance with grant writing, grant management, or folks looking for a fiscal sponsor. We also heard a clear demand for technical assistance with project planning, project coordination, and developing collaboration. And the third demand we heard that really stood out was people wanting a community of practice, wanted developing opportunities for shared learning, networking, and being part of a cohort to learn from. And so in 2023, based on what we heard from our interviews and survey, we implemented a pilot to support community leaders, partners, in early stage projects. The results from our 2023 pilot are highlighted here in bold and included providing $100,000 in small grants. We provided fiscal sponsorship to 3 new projects. We provided technical assistance to more than 10 groups, which resulted in grant funding and plans for their projects. We developed a coastal funding database that we update 2 times per month, where people can find the latest and greatest opportunities for grants. And Lilia will share with you at the end of today's webinar where you can access that database of funding opportunities. We supported 2 regional cohorts, and we hosted a series of webinars in the spring of 2023. And based on the success of our pilot, we've now secured funding, are continuing to move forward with this service-based model and work over the next 2 years. And so I just want to share just a little bit more from our pilot. We supported early stage projects and early stage leaders from across the United States West Coast, as well as in Alaska and Hawaii, by providing small grants, financial and fiscal sponsorship services, networking opportunities, and technical assistance. And the technical assistance we provided helps add and build capacity to help move these projects onto their next phase. So for example, we helped assess the feasibility of a national marine sanctuary in Oregon. You'll hear today a case study from Natalie about our work in Orange County. And in last year's webinar, we spoke about our work to support development of water quality protected areas in California. So these are examples of early stage projects that we help support and move forward. We also provided technical assistance and fiscal sponsorship to support 3 early stage leaders and projects in their communities, such as a project looking to restore a degraded wetland and increase access to nature in West Oakland. So these are just examples of the types of technical assistance and small grants we've been able to provide. And so for 2024, this year, we have a simple application process for people and organizations to apply for funding and technical assistance. We will be providing small grants and up to 20 hours of technical assistance support to 5 to 7 early stage projects and early stage leaders this year. So stay tuned because we'll have an RFP released in March for people to apply for small grants and technical assistance. And with that, let's dig into our great case study presentations today. Our first 2 speakers are Natalie Bartel from Coastal Quest and Daniel Ware from Sustainable Northwest. First, we will hear from Natalie, who is a project manager here at Coastal Quest. Natalie has 6 years of experience in environmentally focused project management. As a project manager, she helps facilitate important conversations, manages project timelines, and writes proposals for coastal projects across California coast. Her case study today is from Orange County and is titled in Identifying Coastal Land to Achieve 30 by 30 Goals and Climate Risk Reduction Through Community Engagement. So Natalie, please share your screen and start your presentation.
Great, thank you, Kristen. I'm going to share my screen now. All right, my screen should be sharing and I'm going to start talking a little faster to make sure I stay within my timeline. Thank you for the opportunity to speak with you today. Like Kristen said, my name is Natalie Bartel and I'm a project manager with Coastal Quest. I feel so honored to be able to speak with the amazing other panelists here today, and I'm excited to hear all their presentations. You already heard a bit about our organization Coastal Quest, so I won't repeat that. But today I want to talk to you specifically about some of our efforts in Orange County to support local groups in planning and implementing coastal solutions, and our model we use there for promoting coastal resilience opportunities through encouraging community engagement. All right. I'll start with a little history about Coastal Quest's work down in Orange County. Coastal Quest has been working down there since 2020, building partnerships with local organizations and conducting interviews with county partners to understand their priorities and needs around coastal resilience and their interests around potentially building some sort of a wetland collaborative. We heard from Orange County stakeholders that in order to build coastal resilience, they wanted a platform to build countywide scientific progress and make decisions that are informed by the people of the region. This kicked off our current effort to create an Orange County Coastal Resilience Partnership. Our goals of this effort were to facilitate a group focused around virtual discussions, presentations, and communications that helps improve the health and resilience of critical coastal ecosystems, sustains coastal endangered species populations, promotes resilient habitats and collaboration around endangered species, supports opportunities to promote resilient non-traditional restoration with public-private partners, and secures funding for climate adaptation planning, implementation, and partnership across sectors, all while using a participatory approach that builds capacity for climate adaptation and region-wide partnerships. We really wanted to promote and find ways to preserve and protect more wetland land that are supported. What this meant in practice was we collaborated with some amazing consultant partners at Environmental Science Associates to complete a vulnerability assessment of Orange County's wetlands. This looked at what wetland habitats throughout Orange County were vulnerable to sea level rise and identified opportunities in those areas for restoration, conservation, or wetland expansion, or existing upland open space areas where sea level rise could naturally inundate and support wetland habitat expansion. We also held 3 virtual meetings in Orange County with partners in May, October, and December to discuss this information. Invitees and participants included Orange County residents, NGOs, government officials, tribal entities, and other partners. We asked participants' opinions on how this assessment should occur, reviewed the vulnerability assessment results with them, and asked what areas to focus on. We then drafted a draft action plan based on this assessment that reviewed next steps, potential next steps for sea level rise planning, and suggested priority potential projects based on locations suggested in the vulnerability assessment. We reviewed in our October virtual meeting the criteria we were thinking about using for assessing potential projects based around the goals that I mentioned earlier, such as cost, community support, and endangered species benefits, and got partner feedback on additional criteria to include. In our December meeting, which was the most recent, we reviewed our initial top 5 potential priority projects and got the participants' opinions on those and what the next steps to move those forward should be. Additionally, we held multiple individual meetings with coastal partners, particularly government and NGO partners that own land that the assessment noted would be vulnerable to sea level rise, to hear their opinions on the vulnerability and gather their expert knowledge. So how did that all go? Well, the vulnerability assessment found that 92 acres of upland wetland habitat could potentially be lost by 2070, even with really conservative levels of sea level rise. And there are roughly 67 parcels along Orange County's coastline that may serve as opportunities to remedy this, either by preserving wetland habitat or restoring habitat to support their wetland function. We heard from partners about particular ones of these that already have projects going on or may not be good opportunities, which helped us narrow down that list a little bit. And I want to emphasize that our process was really shaped by participants, as we heard that they primarily wanted to see conservative estimates of sea level rise and wanted to make sure this project highlighted what other projects were already going on in the area in order to not reduce those projects' impacts. So for our draft action plan and kind of based around that, we narrowed down potential projects based on participants' feedback, and then based around our initial project goals, which I talked about at the beginning. We prioritize projects using criteria around these initial goals, such as projects that may help preserve endangered species habitat, may lead to additional public-private partnerships, may support habitat resiliency and connectivity, and may be able to secure funding for climate adaptation in the area, and ranked the top 5 projects based on how they potentially would achieve those goals amongst some other goals. This resulted in a total of 28 parcels, and which totaled to about 5 opportunities that, based off our initial assessment, would be the most feasible to execute and provide the most benefits. I'll quickly run through one of the top 5 prioritized projects that we presented to the group so you can see what this would look like. One of the top 5 projects were 2 parcels in Newport Beach Back Bay area. We suggested in our meeting that these were an opportunity to enhance the marsh and upland habitat here and increase the viability of the wetland habitat and support potential wetland expansion. Improving the habitat in this 1.5 acre stretch of land would expand current wetland habitat in Newport Beach Back Bay, improve habitat for 6 rare endangered bird species and an endangered plant species, and provide recreational and flood control benefits, and be relatively cheap to implement. And potentially, from what we understood, could have a variety of funders who might be interested in funding this. We also presented to the group some general next steps for this Newport Beach Back Bay potential project and all of our top 5 projects, and got participants' feedback on the steps and our estimated timelines. We received some site-specific feedback from participants, particularly around additional partners to reach out to, types of permits for the specific sites, and the viability of these timelines. And that's where we left it. We're really excited about how this project has moved forward so far, but if you can't tell, this was just the first step and we want to take it further in 2024. What we learned from this pilot process was that initiating projects to build coastal resilience and support preservation of land must be built around the needs and the opinions of local groups. This isn't a novel idea. Multiple different groups have been saying this for years, but any actions that come from this vulnerability assessment and action plan will have to be items that local participants and residents are excited about and interested in moving forward, as we're simply presenting these ideas to a small subset of Orange County in 2023, and want and can help support any additional outreach and communications, but would need community buy-in to move a project forward. So for this year, our goal is to expand our engagement. We want to connect with potential stakeholders, tribal groups, residents, and government organizations who want to be involved in specific projects and help them move forward efforts to protect additional portions of wetlands in Orange County. We plan to talk with partners throughout 2024 and create a final version of our action plan, which is shareable and useful and informed by the Orange County partners and stakeholders and the assessment that was completed. Reviews what coastal land is vulnerable to sea level rise, reviews what projects are currently occurring to protect Orange County's wetlands, and suggests priority projects informed by this effort that would be most feasible to move forward. And map out our next steps or potential project next steps to do so. So our goal in this whole effort is to support local partners to execute restoration or conservation and get more funding moving towards coastal resilience in Orange County. So please feel free to reach out to us if you have any thoughts about that or suggestions of people to reach out to or include, or just want to talk to me. Feel free to reach out. So with that, I want to thank you for letting me speak to you today. Feel free to reach out to me at the email address on the screen if you have any specific follow-up questions or want to hear more. And I'll take any questions once we get to the Q&A portion. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Natalie. And just a reminder for everyone, if you have questions for our speakers, go ahead and type them into our Q&A function on the Zoom app. Next, we will hear from Daniel Ware. Daniel is a forest program manager with Sustainable Northwest. He leads the Northwest Community Forest Coalition for Sustainable Northwest, supporting communities and protecting their drinking water supplies through forest management. Daniel earned an MPA in Environmental Policy and Management from the University of Washington, with the goal of helping conservation nonprofits connect communities to the resources needed for landscape protection. Daniel's talk today is entitled Community Forestry as a Tool for Coastal Forest Land Ownership. So Daniel, please share your screen and start your presentation.
Great. It looks like everyone can see my screen. Like I was just introduced, thanks everyone. My name is Daniel Weir. I'm with Sustainable Northwest and I'm a forest program manager. Sustainable Northwest is a natural resource solutions nonprofit across the Pacific Northwest region, and we really focus on supporting rural communities and help them pursue economic and environmentally beneficial goals and projects. Within our forest team, I personally focus on supporting communities for forest land acquisition and management projects. Like Kristen mentioned earlier, I'm going to be speaking about community forestry more specifically. So before I get into the case study, I just want to introduce, for those who aren't aware, the community forest model. Generally, the community forest model has a goal of bringing forest ownership and management decisions to a community level. So while the ownership structures themselves may vary across different community forests, there's kind of an overarching goal for community forestry to work with private timberland owners or individual landowners and help communities acquire smaller priority acreage parcels of forest that have been prioritized by local community members. So, some of the goals of these models, it include securing access and rights for forest resources and bringing them down to that community level while retaining responsibility for management and the decisions made on forest lands. And this is able to, ensure the value and benefits from the land that supports and reinforces local priorities and economic development objectives. And, I think one of the most common threads we see is that these community forests establish permanent protection of working forest conservation values. So community forests are able to provide significant benefits to their local communities, whether that looks like economic benefits through local employment. Oftentimes community forests will, have forest management or habitat management, but other opportunities for jobs include increased recreation and use, community engagement tools as well. And one of the ethos of community forests is that local engagement around long-term forest management. So a community is able to take a step back and think, how do we look at forest management on a generational scale versus a 10, 15, 50, or 100-year forest management plan. Other benefits of community forests include access because the land ownership is transferring to a broader suite of owners. That could lead to more opportunities and public access benefits. And then certainly education on some of these properties expands as it comes into community ownership. One of the really important things that all community forests share is the idea that there's a natural resource focus based on the property and the acquisition that they go through. And so I'm going to dive a little bit more into the Bear Ridge Community Forest, which is a case study. And it takes place through the city of Ilwaco, which is a coastal community on the border of Washington and Oregon on the mouth of the Columbia River. And you'll see in this picture, there's about 5 miles from the city of Ilwaco itself, there's a orange box, which is highlighting their drinking water reservoir. And the goal of the Bear Ridge Community Forest was to bring that reservoir and that drinking water supply into community ownership. So the goal of the property, it gave the community control of its natural resources. So one of those natural resources is water supply and ensuring a sustainable water supply, into the future. But another one of those goals and benefits is the timber and the forest property that comes with the watershed itself. So another goal of the community forest is to increase access and recreational opportunity on the property. Given that the property was owned by a private timberland company before, there were recreational opportunities, but those required permitting, and oftentimes there were gates that prevented the community members from getting to the property. So now a goal moving forward is to increase the access and potentially even bring outside visitors into the community forest and use some of the future trails. And another one of the long-term goals is not just to stop at an 875-acre parcel, but really to grow sustainably the size of the community forest property. So a bit more detail on the funding of the project itself. The community forest was finalized through an acquisition from the Weyerhaeuser Company, which is a timberland owner across the region, and I believe they're a national timberland owner. And they acquired a 378-acre parcel for an estimated price of $3.3 million. But that funding didn't just come from one place. What's unique about community forests is the varied avenues that funding allows. And so they got a couple federal funds, one from the Community Forest and Open Space Program, another from a federal appropriation through this state senator. But what's really interesting about this property itself is a revolving fund loan that they got around the Clean Water State Revolving Fund. So I'm going to talk a bit more about what the acquisition process looked like, and I want to highlight a couple partners who were involved in this project. So in 2015, the Columbia River Estuary Study Task Force gave a presentation in which Ilwaco community members were present at, and they saw the opportunity to protect their drinking water supply, by better owning and managing the forest land that surrounds it. So not only thinking about, okay, we want to own this Indian Creek Reservoir, which is where they draw their water from, but they want to own the acreage around a forest land that works as a filter, bringing clean water into that reservoir. And so it's not just a tool for filtration, but it's also a tool for risk reduction, as well as some of economic benefit based on the timberland that's available. So like I mentioned, that happened in 2015. And then in 2016, a couple of environmental nonprofits were able to get engaged in the project and lend their support and really make this project happen. One of those is Washington Conservation Action, and the other is Trust for Public Land, who through their staff were able to work directly with the Weyerhaeuser company and kind of move the acquisition forward. And I mentioned some of those funding opportunities, but the best funding tool that community forests, specifically this project, was able to utilize was that Clean Water State Revolving Fund, because initially they requested $3.3 million of a revolving fund and then used that money to leverage other federal resources to bring the land and bring more funding online. And in the end, the revolving fund itself is able to be paid off of through timber harvest on the property as well. So in terms of the community forest itself, the community of Ilwaco now owns the property as of January 2023, and they can look forward now and they can say, okay, we bought the community forest, we own our drinking watershed. How do we manage the forest for increasing our water quality? How do we diversify the species of trees and timber that's on the property, and how do we increase opportunity for recreation and public access, or bring community members, bring school members, bring students, bring classes, or other potential landowners, and teach them about how the forest can work to provide clean drinking water. And like I mentioned before, there's a goal of long-term growth here. The city of Ilwaco has and is piloting some trail studies to look at where they can place trails, how they can bring tourists into the region and bring more jobs into the area based on the trail system and the tourism industry as a whole. Beyond the Ilwaco Community Forest, there is a significant number of community forests across the region. Over the past 20 or so years, the community forest movement has seen significant growth, and the Pacific Northwest region is kind of leading the charge in that. So I'm really excited to see a number of my my Northwest Community Forest Coalition members on this call. And even some of these folks have worked on projects that we've highlighted, like the Ilwaco Community Forest. So I recommend that everyone takes a chance to visit the Northwest Community Forest Coalition's website and see some of the opportunities that are available for potential community forest projects moving forward. And like I mentioned earlier, Sustainable Northwest is excited to work with some small communities and bring and elevate the platform of community forestry as an alternative approach to forest land ownership and acquisition. So I know there's a bit of time for Q&A, but this is my contact information, and I'm happy to answer any questions as they come up.
Thank you so much, Daniel. And we do have time for about one question before we move on to our next two speakers. So just a reminder, please feel free to put questions in our Q&A function, and our speakers will provide answers in the Q&A chat, or will verbally answer them at the Q&A session at the end. But I did have one question here for Daniel to answer right now. For the Bear Ridge Community Forest, how did you define who makes up the community, and what is the governance structure for the community, and which entity actually owns the property?
That's a great question. So the Bear Ridge Community Forest is owned by the city of Ilwaco, and the city council has appointed one staff member or one council member, Matt, to be their kind of intermediary. And in this, so all governance goes through and is voted on by city council. And the structure moving forward is that there'll be forest management committees that will be created, because this is a pretty new community. They're still working out how there's a broader governance structure, but there'll be a couple of, whether it's forest management committees and recreation and access management committees, there'll be local community members who will be kind of invited in and consulting with local land trusts, consulting with local timber, kind of the timber foresters in the region, as well as some other resources such as trail development groups and recreation groups.
Excellent, thank you. And again, if we weren't able to get to your question during this break, our speakers are invited to answer questions over the Q&A chat, and we'll do our best to address any of the remaining questions at our more in-depth Q&A session near the end of the webinar today. But now we're going to move on to our next two speakers who will be sharing their work to preserve cultural and natural resources. So please meet Margaret Treadwell from the McKenzie River Trust and Monica Franco from Wild Coast. First, we will hear from Margaret, who is the Central Coast Conservation Program Manager for the McKenzie River Trust. Margaret is based in the Trust Coastal Office in Newport, Oregon. She connects with community members, landowners, and organizations to cultivate land and water conservation opportunities and steer these projects to completion. She holds a Master of Natural Resources degree from Oregon State University, where her research focused on coastal wetland restoration and carbon offset projects, and has a professional background in government, international relations, and consulting. And Margaret's talk today is titled Partnering for Conservation at Cape Foulweather, Oregon. So Margaret, please feel free to share your screen and start your presentation.
Thanks, Kristen. Let me get my presentation up. How does that look?
Great.
Fantastic, thank you. Well, thank you so much. As Kristen said, I'm the Central Coast Conservation Program Manager for the McKenzie River Trust. And I'm really happy to be here today to share about a really exciting project that I've had the privilege of working on for the last few years. Right now you can see this beautiful place on your screen. McKenzie River Trust is the owner of this property. This is just a small part of it on the Oregon coast. And we are working with the Confederated Tribes of Siletz Indians to transfer the land to them using grant funding. First, I would be remiss if I didn't tell you a little bit about McKenzie River Trust. We're a land trust based in Eugene with that satellite office in Newport. And our mission is to help people protect and care for the lands and rivers they cherish in Western Oregon. And we do that and have done that primarily through acquiring land for conservation and working with landowners to place conservation easements on their properties. But in the last few years, we've done more of this kind of partner project where we play a role but aren't the ultimate holder of either the land or a conservation easement. A little bit about the place, Cape Foulweather, for anyone who's not familiar. This is located on the Central Oregon coast. It's a bluff that rises about 500 feet above the Pacific Ocean and provides sweeping views of the Oregon coast and Pacific Ocean. There's a scenic viewpoint there by that little white building. And if you stand there on a really any day, but especially in the summer, you'll see gray whales, and there are kelp beds offshore that they feed in. You'll see seabirds nesting on the cliffs, and Oregon's fantastic waves hitting the rocks. This place was named by Captain Cook on his voyage to the North Pacific in 1778, but of course it was already known to the indigenous people of the Oregon coast since time immemorial. So just for those who aren't as familiar with Oregon, I'll just establish where this is. The big yellow dot on the Central Coast. It's about 100 miles southwest of Portland, and that's a 2.5-hour drive because there's no interstate that goes there. A little closer, you can see it's about 9 miles north of Newport, Oregon, which is a city of about 10,000 people. And on the Oregon coast, that's a sizable city. So just for reference. And it has connectivity and proximity to other conserved lands and marine protected areas. You can see there's the Otter Rock Marine Reserve off the coast there in the light pink. The darker pink in the ocean, the darker pink in the ocean is the Marine Reserve. The lighter pink is the Marine Garden. And it's also within the ancestral homelands of the Confederated Tribes of Siletz Indians and the original Coast Reservation. And there's a dashed outline there that shows the area of 250 historic tribal allotments that I'll talk a little bit more about. So we learned from the tribe that the Confederated Tribes of Siletz Indians includes 28 bands historically located across Western Oregon, whose members were forced into a 1.1 million acre coast reservation by the US government during the mid 1800s. And although that reservation was large for its time and history, the people who were placed there previously lived and managed the entirety of all of Western Oregon. So the reservation was quite a bit smaller than that. Most of that reservation land was then stolen by the federal government by 1900. And we learned that in the late 1800s, parcels of land called allotments could be assigned to individual tribal members, and they were. And this map on your screen shows some of those allotments, and numbers 4S and 5S include the property that I am discussing today. So these allotments to tribal members were also lost in the 1930s. So the property that we own now that's going to be transferred to the tribe consists of about 27 acres. It is undeveloped, which is pretty rare on this part of Oregon's coast. And it's this sloping meadow that you see here in the middle of your screen, just to the right of the bluff, and also includes that forested area on the right of the screen up until the house there, which is the boundary of the property. So this was for sale on the open market and zoned residential. And so it was developable. Plans had been floated in the past of, up to, I think, 20 houses. And this was brought to our attention at McKenzie River Trust by the Confederated Tribes of Siletz Indians, the Lincoln County Planning Department, and the Nature Conservancy. And they described it as kind of otherworldly and untouched, something you don't see that much on the Central Coast. So there are about 11 acres of Sitka spruce forest, and then a bit of alder shore pine mix. And then it's got about 14 acres of a salt spray meadow, which is a rare habitat that's been mostly lost on the coast due to development. The salt spray meadow is notable because that's habitat for the federally threatened Oregon silver spot butterfly, specifically its obligate host plant for the larval form. And there are very few remaining populations. There's only 5 of them, and 4 are on the central Oregon coast. The Sitka spruce forest also includes many very large trees, which is potential habitat for the threatened marbled murrelet, and then also has a secluded rocky intertidal zone that the Pacific harbor seals enjoy. The property is also just to the south of this Otter Crest State Scenic Viewpoint, which is a spot where you get that sweeping view I talked about. And there are interpretive signs and a little shop and visitors center. And so the property has scenic value, which supports tourism on the Central Coast by preserving this dramatic view along Otter Crest Loop to not have new houses encroaching on that view. So that was factored into our assessment, and also it helped in our grant application, which I will talk about in a minute. So how did this project come together? There's a lot of partners, a lot of moving pieces. The Siletz tribe determined that they were interested in being the eventual owner of the property. And the tribe in Lincoln County asked that MRT, McKenzie River Trust, consider being an interim landowner. So ownership of this property offered the tribe the first opportunity to own oceanfront properties since those allotments were extinguished. And they saw it as a way to provide access for tribal elders and other tribal members to gather plants and animals that are important to their culture, their lifeways and sustenance in the meadow, the forest, and the rocky intertidal. So our land trust was responsible for purchasing the property, taking out a loan to do so, and we're owning and managing the property for the short term. And then we're working with the tribe and with actually the state of Oregon Department of Land Conservation and Development to secure acquisition funding through the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration Coastal Zone Management, Habitat Protection and Restoration Bipartisan Infrastructure Law funding, which is a mouthful. But happily, we were awarded funding for the project. And so we're just working through the grant requirements, kind of the bureaucratic hurdles to have the funds released. And then the tribe will purchase the property from us using those funds. So what are the long-term plans for the property? What's this going to look like? So once it's transferred to them, the Confederated Tribes of Siletz Indians will continue to manage the property for its conservation and cultural values, including educational purposes. For example, the elders teaching younger generations how to steward plants to support their traditional life ways. They'll do intertidal collecting, cultural stewardship field trips for kids, like in this picture, gathering culturally important plants. And then they also will do field trips for the social work and mental health functions of the tribe. So it was shared with us that the disconnection from culturally important plants and animals and places is one of the causes behind mental health issues, and that spending time reconnecting in a safe, natural place like this is a very helpful component of their recovery programs. It's very healing for groups to spend time in a quiet, natural place. So, and then of course there will be other gatherings for tribal members. So that wraps up my presentation. I think 1 or 2 minutes over, I'm sorry. And if anyone has any questions, happy to field them now or later. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Margaret. That was excellent. And just a reminder, folks can type questions for Margaret in the Q&A chat. And let's see. Next, we will be hearing from Monica Franco, who is the Director of Wild Coast in Mexico. Monica is based in Ensenada, Baja California, and she oversees all conservation programs and operations from Baja California to Oaxaca. Monica joined the Wild Coast team in the year 2013 as the Magdalena Bay Program Coordinator, and later led the Federal Conservation Concessions Project, where she helped to protect tens of thousands of acres of globally important and carbon sequestering coastal and marine ecosystems. In 2017, she was named Wild Coast Mexico Deputy Director and appointed as the Mexico Director in 2020, where she now leads the design and conservation strategies for mangroves, coral reefs, sea turtles, and coastal desert wildlands. Monica's talk today is entitled Community-Based Mangrove Restoration in Mexico. So Monica, please share your screen and start your presentation.
Yes, excellent. So thank you so much for the invitation. I'm really glad to be here and share with you our experiences doing restoration in Mexico. So Wild Coast is a international team that conserves coastal and marine ecosystems and addresses climate change through natural solutions. We have 24 years working on this mission from California to Oaxaca, and we are a 27 member team as in now. So today I'll be sharing with you one of our restoration initiatives in Mexico in a small community called El Dátil. El Dátil is one of the most isolated coastal communities in the peninsula of Baja California. And it's a 300 people, a small town that you can see at the upper left. And they are part of this project, and that's where the name of the presentation comes from. So we collaborate with them not only to carry out the restoration activities, but also they're very involved in the land attaining of the area where we are trying to restore. And this is very important because in Mexico, the legal status of coastal land is very complicated, and getting permits is also complicated. And that's why the community has to be involved in every step of the way. And I'll share a little bit more on that. So El Dátil is located within a biosphere reserve, El Vizcaíno. And El Vizcaíno is home of the Laguna San Ignacio, which is one of the last remaining breeding lagoons for gray whales. This is an iconic place worldwide because in the 90s, it was threatened by this mega development of a salt mine led by the Mitsubishi company, and prompted one of the the biggest environmental campaign to save an important site such as this one. So we have a community that is sensitive to conservation issues. There's a community that is very involved on decision making, and there's community also that understand the value of the natural resources. And it's easy for us to build the interest on conserving ecosystems that provide multiple benefits, such as mangroves, right? So mangroves provide, it's a textbook example of multi-benefits of implementing nature-based solutions to climate change. And that's what we're going to talk a little bit on this. So we're working with the community El Dátil to restore around 300 acres of mangrove ecosystems. This is one of those sites that is under restoration. Restoration of mangroves provide not only protection against hurricanes, storms, because they are a natural barrier against sea level rise as well, but also absorb and store up to 5 times more carbon than terrestrial forest. So restoring them is important in a way that it's helping us fight climate change, but also protecting the communities that surround these ecosystems. So far, we have planted 177,000 mangrove seedlings in collaboration with community members that potentially in the next 5 to 8 years will store over 2,000 tons of carbon. The other benefit that this project has is that we're creating opportunities and jobs for underserved communities, and very specifically in the community of El Dátil that depends only on fisheries. In bad years for fisheries, or in years where the prices of the product is very low, many people is out of jobs. So actually temporary jobs. So the restoration project is providing this extra or additional income because they collect the seedlings, plant the seedlings, and also carry out maintenance. So it's a way to create income. The funding for this project comes not only from donors that support them through WALCOST, but also from government subsidies. So there's an equation there where the funding that is helping them create these opportunities for underserved communities is combined, and that's why collaboration it's very important. Through this project, we're also promoting equity. The group that is carrying out the project is 13 women called Mujeres del Dátil, or Women from El Dátil. There's multi-generational women that are now very independent. They organize themselves. They have their own system to keep count of how many hours they're working, how many seedlings they're planting, who's taking decisions, who's representing them, who's doing the due process to apply to subsidies or to make reports for us. And it has been very emotional for, especially, and I said this very personally, to see them grow. We started working with them in 2019, and now 4 years later, they're just in full force doing the restoration. We're also, another benefit is that we are building capacity, not only for this group, but for other groups of women. This is a picture of an exchange of experiences that we hosted in La Paz 2 years ago. 2 years ago, where 5 different groups of women restoring mangroves met to share experiences and to learn from each other knowledge. So in order to implement this project, we have to do a very deep dive into the legal status of coastal land in Mexico, which, as I mentioned, is very complicated. So the first thing that we have to acknowledge is that mangroves in Mexico are owned by the federal government. So the kind of permits and due process that we have to follow has to be with federal authorities. And there's 2 things that we have to do. The first one is to attain the land, which can be done through a process called federal concessions, where we request the federal government to grant us a concession for a coastal environment, as it is called. So in the picture, you can see that the beach, or the first 60 feet of coast that is measured from the highest recorded tide inland, it's called federal zone. So you can request a concession for that. You have to pay rent, quote unquote, to be able to use it. And if you request further of those 60 feet, and you request a coastal environment concession, it's where most of the mangroves or degraded ecosystems of mangroves are located. And it's the same, you have to pay for that concession. You can ask it, we can ask it as a nonprofit, or they can ask for it as a community. But the truth is that it's very expensive. So it's not cost effective to do it, but it's a way to attain the land to conduct restoration. The other one is called environmental management units. So what you do is to request a piece of land that is federal land, in this case, mangroves. And you say, I want to do some management of the resources within this unit. And you present a management program that is according to the activity that you want to do. In this case, we want to collect seedlings, mangrove seedlings, and restore certain areas of this unit. And it's important that the person or the people that ask for this unit, or for this registration of the management unit, is it's related to the area. So in this case, what we're doing is that the group of women are requesting the permit and registering the management unit, and additionally asking for the seedlings collection permit as well. So, and this is something that we don't have to do each year. We can do it every 5 years. Once you get the permit, you can just renew it. And this is how we have managed to be able to secure this area and make sure that we are following up on the restoration efforts for at least the next 5 years. And I think that's it on my end. Thank you so much. Any questions? I'll be here all night. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Monica. So any questions for Monica, please feel free to type into the Q&A chat. And I'm now going to pass this over to Sadie to tell us about a poll we're going to give, and then lead us through the more in-depth Q&A portion of our program.
And I'm sorry, I was trying to find my mute button. Apologies for the pause. Thank you so much to our speakers. These have been fantastic case studies. I think we've all learned a great deal, so thank you there. And before we move on to our Q&A session, we have a couple of questions for you, the audience. We'd like to hear a bit more about you and your work. And if Lilia, if you wouldn't mind, please launch our poll. And I'll just share with you, it should pop up on your screen. We've got a couple questions that we'd like to just run by you. And these are kind of focused on the work that you're doing, so we can learn more about the audience and the community. So as we work together to build a community of practice, we hope to learn from you, our audience, as well as our speakers, on what would be most helpful to you, and what would help you with your nature-based solutions projects, the ones that you're working on currently. So please take a moment to review the polls, the questions on the poll, and share your answer, and they'll help inform future webinars and help build meaningful tools to accelerate your work. So we'll let that run for just a minute. And while you're answering those questions, you'll have noticed that the Q&A is open. So this is a space where we're capturing the questions. It allows our speakers to answer some of them just in type, and we'll probably read some of them aloud. Once you've completed the poll, please type your questions to the speakers, and we'll moderate the questions in the Q&A If you feel comfortable, we'll invite you to unmute yourself and share the questions verbally with the group. Otherwise, we're happy to read them on your behalf. I have a few more. Just give it a couple more minutes for you to read through the questions. Thank you for sharing thoughtful responses. Great. Okay, and you can continue to answer to the poll as we move into the Q&A session. So thanks for completing that and sharing your projects with us. We'll be sure to share back in our post-webinar communications to let you know our findings. So we'll give you the opportunity to ask questions of the speakers about their work, and we welcome you to share your current projects if you have similar challenges, you're looking for support or finding solutions. So if you have questions for Monica, Margaret, Natalie, or Daniel, please type them in the Q&A window located in the bottom of the Zoom application, and we'll invite you to ask them out loud if you'd like. We do have a couple questions, and perhaps we'll kick this off with Natalie. We wanted to ask, what do you think about what worked well through your process as you were going through? What are some of the pieces that were like, yes, this is how you should do it. This is a great piece of the puzzle while you were going through your process. So what do you think worked well through your process with your work? If you could share, Natalie, that would be great.
Yeah, I can share really quickly. For our work that we were doing in Orange County, I think it was very helpful to have both results and examples from the vulnerability assessment work that we were doing and the resiliency opportunity work that we were doing, like maps or different specific examples to help garner feedback from that, even when we sometimes were not able to share full results. Obviously, we didn't do that perfect sometimes. Sometimes the content we presented was presented too complicated, but just having those examples really helped move forward discussion with Orange County residents.
That's great. Thank you so much, Natalie. And we have another question here, actually from Margaret. Would just like to dig in a little deeper about how did the McKenzie River Trust develop a relationship with Confederate tribes or Siletz Indians? How did that come to be?
Yeah, so it happened like very organically. We had basically field staff who were working on restoration projects in the Willamette Valley, which is the central valley of Oregon. And through a funding program, there was a requirement for tribal consultation on those restoration projects, which is fantastic. So through those projects, basically like professional relationships were developed. And anyone who works in the field knows that you kind of help each other out when folks are working in the field. So it even evolved to things like we had a time where one of our tide gates blew out, and one of their natural resources staff had the materials we needed and happened to be nearby and showed up and helped fix that kind of emergency problem. And that relationship just kind of developed over the course of about 5 to 7 years to a place where the tribe felt comfortable asking us if we would help them with a land acquisition project, which we did. It was similar to Cape Foulweather, but a little bit more straightforward. And then that led to having a memorandum of understanding to collaborate on projects like that. And then here we are today working on this project. So it really developed over time, and I think listening to the tribe and what they wanted to work with us on was super important, instead of trying to fit them into projects we already had in our mind. So I would say that that's the big takeaway there.
Thank you, Margaret. That's great. And then I see in the Q&A, we have a question from Amy Beth Willis. And Amy Beth, I know that Daniel has shared some information in the Q&A, but I think this is a really interesting question and would love it if you would be willing to unmute yourself and go ahead and ask the question. And Daniel, if you could share some of your resources verbally, that would be great.
I'm happy. Yeah, I'm happy to
Okay.
share. I'm not sure if Amy Beth is still on the call.
Oh, great. Okay, I can ask the question and have you
Yeah.
share. How's that, Daniel?
Sure.
So Amy Beth asks, has the community forest movement been spearheaded by any indigenous groups? Go ahead, Daniel.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's a multitude of ways that tribal partners have engaged in the community forest movement. There are a couple of community forests that are led and came into tribal ownership, and I shared those examples. One of them would be the Kalispel, the Indian Creek Community Forest, which is owned by the Kalispel tribe in Northeast Washington, and that's actually it's a really wonderful project there. Because the broader region of northeastern Washington is fairly under-resourced and underserved, and the Kalispel tribe owns, I think it's a 350-acre community forest that is kind of a regional hub. But then they're also able to open up their the community forest and some of their tribal resources to the broader community as well. So that is, I would say, the most direct within the Pacific Northwest region, that community forest is kind of a really great example of tribally led effort. And another example would be the Yurok tribal community forest, and I shared that link as well in the Q&A. And that's a partnership, and I don't want to speak too much on it because Sustainable Northwest and kind of my work directly has not been involved in that partnership, but I know that they received funding and support to expand their Blue Creek salmon sanctuary. And so it's the community forest. That effort is part of a broader conservation tribal land management effort that they're undergoing. But I want to say more broadly, one of the really positive things that we've seen with the community forest movement is that there's widely consistent engagement with neighboring tribes and tribes that lived on the land in time immemorial to get their management expertise and their intention and hope for the properties to align with the community itself and whomever the landowner ends up being, because there is the opportunity for multiple voices and multiple perspectives to be applied to any given management plan that gets introduced.
Thank you so much, Daniel. That's great. And there are links and resources, Daniel, added into the Q&A for people to follow up there. And Monica, you spoke about the engaged and very knowledgeable community that you're working with. And I wanted to ask, how can we replicate this work with other communities? It seemed like there was a really high level of involvement with the communities, and what lessons have been learned from similar communities, if you could share.
I think that one of the main things that we consider when we were planning the project was the needs that they had as community. So most of these communities are very underserved. So we wanted to hear about what were the main needs and the main things they wanted to achieve with the project. So the first and most important was income, especially because these are groups of women that have way less opportunities to be economically independent. So the first one was to develop a system for them to be fair and to be compensated for what they were doing, but also a system where they were incentivized to look beyond the project. So the two communities that we are working, El Dátil and El Conchalito, they are both looking at opportunities for ecotourism because they both live in areas that are dependent on both fisheries and tourism. they would like to develop more skills on that regard. So that was the first thing that we did. If we didn't have the support of the community, we wouldn't be able to start the project. So my main advice will be that, to bring them in the planning process, to set goals along with them, but also to respect the system that they have to organize within their own group, because that's going to help them feel like they have a voice. They will get help them build more capacity to advocate for themselves outside of our project, outside of the restoration effort, so they can do other stuff, and they can plan for other type of projects and activities beyond what we are doing to conserve mangroves. So yes.
Thank you, Monica. And there is a question in the Q&A that is maybe a follow-up to that, and it was, what kinds of benefits did the women you presented receive? What kind of benefits would they get? There's an understanding that there's a financial benefit, but how are these benefits generated, and how are they distributed to these women?
Yes, thank you. That's a great question, and I'd love to elaborate. Yes, they do receive compensation for every seedling that they plant directly. So the group, this 13 group of women coordinate to go and collect seedlings, and the same day they go and plant the seedling on their designated areas that we designed, and they keep a record on that. And depending on how many seedlings they planted, they're being paid for that each month or every 2 weeks, depending on how many seedlings they are planting each month, because depend on the seedling production. The other benefit is that we rent boats in the community so they can go and do that job, and we pay for the gas. So the people that own boats in the community get also benefits from the project. We also compensate to those families that provide lunch for the women, because sometimes they have to go for 6 or 7 hours. So we provided lunch, and that the family, that they take turns to make the food, so they will be compensated for that. And the funding comes from grants, private grants from Wild Coast, and also from subsidies that because they are within a natural protected area, they have access to federal subsidies that come through the reserve. So these are subsidies to carry out conservation projects, and they're available for any member of the community that are willing to present conservation projects. And that's the role that we play with them as well. So we help them apply for these subsidies, and they get this money directly through the fishing co-op that fiscally sponsor them. And they organize, and every time that they get this subsidy, we kind of restructure the way they are being paid from Wild Coast. So it's a negotiation every year, and we say there is a negotiation, but of course we're not like saying, no, you're getting less money this year because you got a subsidy. That's not how it works. It's just a way to build confidence in them, and a way to build capacity on negotiation and to advocate, and another type of projects that they're being involved now, that they're becoming famous for the work that they're doing. So yeah, that's how we do the benefits part.
Monica, thank you so much. And thank you actually to Daniel, to Margaret, to Natalie, our speakers. I want to thank you all for the audience, all for your thoughtful questions. I'm sorry that's all we have time for question-wise right now, but you can feel free to reach out directly to the speakers. They've all shared their email addresses and are interested in continuing this conversation. Contact information for our speakers. Sorry, it's the slides. Here we go. We have the contact information in the chat, and we also have it coming up a little bit later in one of our slides here. So at this point, I'd actually, before we conclude the webinar, we have an important update to share with regards to our funding, our coastal funding database. Each week, Lilia and Natalie work behind the scenes at Coastal Quest to bring you a collection of new funding opportunities to support your work. And here to tell us about this resource is Lilia.
Thank you, Sadie. Hi, everyone. I'm Lilia. I'm program coordinator here at Coastal Quest. And as Sadie mentioned, we host a coastal funding database. This database was actually launched in 2023 during our March webinar series. We had participants express a desire for a tool to help identify funding that supports coastal resilience and nature-based solutions. So that's kind of how this coastal funding database came to be. Next slide, if you don't mind. The Coastal Funding Database actually began as a Google Doc, so there's sort of a little screenshot of it at the bottom there. And we updated it weekly. That we then began sending out email updates every other week to a group of subscribers so we could highlight some of the new opportunities we thought they would be interested in. And then eventually we had so many opportunities, our Google Doc lost a decent amount of its functionality. So we had to kind of kick it out of there. So the exciting news that really I have for all of you today is that our funding database is being moved to our Coastal Quest website. So it's going to be sort of similar to our current database. The new coastal funding database will include international and U.S. national opportunities, additionally opportunities for a variety of U.S. states. So we have a special focus on California, Oregon, Washington, Alaska, and Hawaii, but that's not to say you won't see a few opportunities from other states. And then in our new table, which will look like this, it hasn't quite launched yet, but it's coming soon, so stay tuned. You'll be able to actually sort by the added date, so you can see new opportunities that Natalie and I have collaborated on adding, so you won't miss anything. And then you'll additionally be able to sort by the due date, so you can see maybe what opportunities you need to focus on first and foremost because their due dates are right around the corner. So basically our goal is to provide an easy to use and concise tool. But for full details of whatever opportunity you may be looking at, we really recommend clicking the links in the right-hand column that say learn more, because our summaries are very minimal. They won't tell you full eligibility requirements or maybe some other requirements of the grant opportunity. So in order to stay up to date, I will go ahead and drop the funding database email sign up in the chat so that you can all sign up if you are interested in learning more about the funding opportunities we have. Like I said, right now it's kind of a clunky Google Doc, but hopefully in the very near future we will be launching this new database on the Coastal Quest website that has a much easier functionality. Thank you all.
Thank you, Lilia, for sharing these exciting updates. And yes, this has been quite a great tool that's come out. It's updated, as I said, every week, and it's going to be really amazing to have the new functionality within the database. So this is actually our webinar today is part one of a two-part series, and we will be hosting our next part of the series, the webinar, coming up on March 14th, same time, and we'll be launching early stage multi-benefit nature-based solutions information, sharing that with you. Lilia has placed the link to register for that webinar into our chat. So quick next steps as we're coming to the conclusion of our webinar. Just so you know, the session has been recorded and will be posted online after the completion of the webinar series. We'll also be sending out an evaluation, so please keep an eye out for that in your inbox. And please feel free to reach out to us if you have any questions, suggestions, or opportunities for collaboration. Another big piece is stay tuned for the launching of our small grants RFP, which will be coming up in March. So in case you missed it in the chat, we wanted to make sure that you have our speakers' contact information, and just to say a huge thank you to our speakers for your excellent presentations and discussions. And they have invited you all to reach out to them with any follow-up questions that you have. So there we have contact informations and emails. And finally, thank you to you, our amazing audience, for your excellent questions and participation. And if you'd like to reach out to Coastal Quest, you can reach us at info@coastalquest.org as well. And that concludes our webinar for today. Thank you so much for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you in March. Take care.